Toyota has enjoyed a historic start to this year's World Rally Championship. Incredible success in Monte Carlo and Sweden. We've come here to the headquarters of Toyota Gazoo Racing in Jyväskylä, Finland. We're here to meet one of the key players in that success. We're going to meet Technical Director Tom Fowler. For the next hour and a half, you'll get to know Tom a bit better. You'll find out some incredible secrets from that remarkable power stage in Japan at the end of last season. And you'll find out what this season and the future holds for Toyota. Tom Fowler, Technical Director of Toyota Gazoo World Rally Team. First thing we've got to say is, what a start. It is a history-making start to the championship. Never before in more than 50 years has anybody done what you've done. How did you do it? 1-2 and 1-2 in Monte in Sweden.
Yeah, well, it's a stat which someone told me before you, but actually I didn't recognise it, or a lot of us didn't know it until it was told to us. I think the most important thing is that, of course, the points is the most important part of that to have in the bag. We have to look forwards because 2 good rallies out of 14 isn't enough for anything. So, yeah, just looking to the next round to try to maximise our score again.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was. But in fairness, you're absolutely right, because if we'd started with, say, Portugal and Sardinia or something, and you got 60 and 60 points from both of those, you could read more into that, couldn't you? But Monte and Sweden are quite unique events, really, aren't they?
Yeah, they're both very specific, and particularly Monte Carlo is kind of all or nothing. Yeah, it's an event where you can have a fantastic result if all of the things go your way in terms of weather condition, tyre choice, and of course a little bit of luck in the tricky conditions. But on the other hand, you're never far from something going, let's say, not wrong, but to have a problem.
Right.
Not right, exactly. Yeah. So you can do a really good result in Monte if everything goes your way, but you're so close to disaster all the time that you always come out of there with a little bit of like, whew, that one's over. Yeah. And then Sweden is totally different, where usually your conditions are relatively consistent. Of course, you've only got one tyre to choose from. So it's a little bit, I wouldn't say more simple, but at least the strategy is more straightforward. So it comes down to the driver, the stages, and what can they push out on the day. You know,
I've always fancied being in a rally control to follow an event, and Monte's the one that I'd love to be in, because it must be, as every stage starts, you take a deep breath and you just don't know what's coming, do you?
To be honest, it's a love it and hate it situation I've seen with different people I've worked with over the years. Yeah. Personally, it's not my favourite rally because it is so. There is so much to go wrong. There is the situation with the weather, of course, is that weather forecasting is not an exact science. Yeah. We all know we can check the weather for tomorrow, it can tell us what's going to happen, you get up and it's totally different. So when you put this into a rally scenario, all of the information can tell you you've got the correct tyre. You leave the service park and 45 minutes later there's a phone call to say it's snowing here, did you know that was going to happen? Yeah. And it's happened to the very best of teams at the very worst of moments over the last decades of rallying in that event. So I find this very stressful, but I know other teammates who revel in the challenge of selecting the right tyres and the opportunity you can get to make a big difference as a team member. So yeah, it goes both ways.
What is it actually like then? Because obviously you've got Sébastien Ogier in the team, you've had him in the team for quite a while, and surely he's one of the people that does revel in those conditions. And can you take a kind of confidence from Ogier? Does he have that kind of inner calm around the chaos of Monte Carlo?
Yeah, I mean, it brings both sides of the story, because of course Sébastien Ogier has a certain expectation of the result in Monte Carlo. You know, winning it for the 10th time this year. He's come to our team, and there's an expectation that we can deliver what he needs to win that event, as he's done it so many times before. And if he ceased to be able to do that in our car or in our team, it would be quite clear who was at fault there, because he's a known winner of the event, even it's so complicated. So that puts a pressure on us to deliver that. Luckily, over the years, we've shown that we can do that with him. So that's really positive. But then when you have him in your team, he brings a certain level of understanding of the event. And really, it's actually something that I spoke about after this Monte Carlo, because it was such a difficult one to find the correct tyre and the correct conditions in each stage was changing so much. People like Seb, who've done the rally so many times, they have this sense about what's going to happen, and it's something that you can't write down exactly what it is, but to have them in the team and it's like raising questions, I think, is the most important thing. We've had situation where we've spent the whole night before Monte Carlo going through the stage conditions, calculating which tyres to use. And Seb Ogier comes at 4:30 in the morning and says something, and we all look at each other and say, "Oh, we didn't think about that." And to have that kind of person to push you really helps.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you kind of touched on Sweden there, that it's more sort of straightforward, but it's also a little bit more indicative of some of the faster rallies. Finland, Estonia back this year. The setup of the car isn't radically different, I'd imagine, from those events.
Yeah, it definitely, in terms of tendency towards the gravel events, it's closest to the fast rallies you mentioned. There is some specific things for snow. Of course, the car, in terms of the homologated parts, is a gravel car, but the tuning on top of that for the suspension, and probably more so in the differentials, has a certain tint which comes from the snow element, and how to make those studded tyres work, which of course is very different to how a gravel tyre is working. So that's where the differences come from.
Yeah. Coming into this year, in terms of personnel behind the wheel, obviously Kalle Rovanpera back for a full season, but it's Elfyn that's stepped up and kind of raised his game, and now going into Safari, he has more than double the points of his nearest non-Toyota rival. It's very early, we're 2 rounds in, but is there something with Elfyn? Have you seen a bit of a change, or is this just Elfyn doing what we know he's capable of doing?
I think with Elfyn, there's absolutely no question that on his day, he's the fastest or one of the fastest guys. He's in that top level that the championship has in terms of drivers. And you can always tell with Elfyn when he comes into an event what kind of mindset he's in, mainly from how the first stages go. If he comes and he's on it, he'll be on it.
Yeah.
And we've seen that this season, that when he's come into the events, the mindset is there, and he's hit the ground running in terms of his driving from the early stages, and then being able to hold that, improve that, and most importantly is for any driver, not just Elfyn, is to handle the dips that come during the rally. We are talking about events which are 3 or 4 days long. Mm-hmm. You aren't going to have a perfect stage every stage, and how you handle that as a driver is one of the most important things. It can be slightly wrong setup, slightly wrong tyre choice, slightly bad driving, or whatever it might be. You have to get to the end of the stage and say, okay, that was the bad one, but it's not going to affect me going forwards. Yeah. And we've seen this year that he's handled that situation in these first 2 rallies really well. And it's been an important point because we've had so many new things this season in terms of technical regulations that no matter how good the team prepares, you aren't going to be correct all of the time in 20 odd stages per event. There's going to be moments where you don't quite have the correct setup. Maybe the tyre's not working for you at that time. And you have to understand that losing a few seconds but understanding why and moving on to the next stage and improving is much more important than thinking too much about the past.
And you said, I'm sure, in your mind as in my mind, is Sunday in Sweden, that first stage where Taka took that time out of him, and there was that kind of pivotal moment where you thought, okay, this could go one of 2 ways. Elfyn could now settle for second, take the points, still lead the championship, or he could fight back. And it was incredibly, from my side, it was incredibly impressive to see that he had that absolute fight in him, which you'd expect on round 2. But that was what it was, wasn't it? You know, he knew he'd got to take that time back. What were your thoughts on that Sunday morning?
Yeah, I was confident that he was going to do a good stage. What we saw from the time was actually an incredible stage, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think it's the mindset that we're talking about that we've seen him with this season so far, which is that he wanted to win that rally. He wanted to get those points. The first run of that stage, obviously he wasn't happy with what he did and knew he could do better, and went out in the second one and really laid down the law for not just Takamoto but the whole rally, because he completely we looked at the performance of Oit or Thierry in that stage. They were pushing incredibly hard, and you can see it in the mistakes that they made. Actually, they were fast, but they lost time here and there, whereas Elfyn was fast, but he didn't lose time, and that's how he did that incredible stage.
Yes, yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot made of looking back now and talking about Elfyn's performance in 2021 when he was almost world champion in a non-hybrid car, and now suddenly we're non-hybrid again, and is there a correlation between that? It's difficult, isn't it? Because people kind of almost forget that it's a very different car. You know, there's no centre diff in these cars, there's different gearbox, different transmission. What parallels do you think we can draw between the pace that we saw in Elfyn in the non-hybrid 21 car and what we're seeing this year?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and of course it's something that as a team that we investigate all of these parameters about. Not only why are we as a team fast or slow in different sectors, but why are different drivers doing different things in different sectors, and that also means from rally to rally, season to season. The hybrid one is something that you're not the first person to mention. That, you know, is Elfyn's performance this season related? Our information says no. We have an understanding about what has gone in Elfyn's direction, aside from his own mindset and his own performance. Of course, there's other elements that can contribute. We don't think that the hybrid is one of them, but of course it can have an effect.
And maybe even it could even be a bit of a psychological thing, that, you know, there is an element that he's not got to deploy, to regen, to all of that. And I'm not saying he hasn't got the capacity to do that. Of course he has, but it is just, it's that kind of step back. I don't know. Maybe I'm not going to delve into Elfyn's psychology.
I think what's important to look at this season is the amount of things that's changed. So the hybrid has gone away. The engine is less powerful because of the restrictor change. The car is lighter. It's not only lighter, but it's a different balance because of the weight mostly coming away from the rear. Where the hybrid battery was situated. And on top of that, the only thing that holds the car on the road, the tyre, is totally different. The performance that's needed and the way to extract the performance as a team and as a driver has changed immensely since last season. I think Elfyn has done a really good job on his transition from what, if we think about it in a testing perspective. At the end of last year, particularly as a team, we were trying to extract everything we possibly can from a car with those tyres of last year and that setup, all the way up until Japan power stage. We were brainstorming between us and the drivers how to get every single millisecond out of that car with that setup. But come Monte Carlo, nearly all of that information had to be different. So as a team, we had to swap over our mindset about what are the most important elements to concentrate on. But the drivers had to do the same thing. And I think as a team, we've done it well. And I think as a driver, Elfyn has done it well.
Yeah, really well. Yeah. You mentioned, obviously, that scrap right up until the power stage of last year. I'll take you back a bit further. 2018, first Manufacturers Championship. That's a bit further. You won the Manufacturers Championship by 27 points. 2021, the start of a great run. 58 points you won by. 22, 70 points. 2023, 116 points. 2024, 3 points. Last year was a little bit too close for comfort.
Actually last year, we've had some very difficult seasons as a team, starting from 2017. Of course, we were, compared to today, massively underprepared in 2017. I mean, we had a car, yes, we had drivers, and we had a kind of operation ongoing that we put together very, very quickly. But the difference in how we go to an event and the preparedness we have today than what we had then is, I mean, you can't even list everything that's different because it's just a completely different world.
Really?
And so 2017 was a really difficult season. You know, the ups and downs that we went through, strong performances in certain rallies, complete disasters in others, which we had to learn from because doing things badly a second time wouldn't be acceptable.
But maybe just you need to put a bit of context into this, because how much time, you talk about lack of preparation time, it was mad, wasn't it? You know, how late you started the development of the car, and of course there was a car developed, but that was set to one side because that was a different car, and there was a lot of kind of politics going on. But when would you say you finally had a car that you thought, right, now we're ready for Monte Carlo?
Yeah, I think we can categorise the starting point as complicated and leave it from there. And then if we say the starting point is basically zero, that was around the 15th of September 2015.
Right.
So basically coming up to the end of the year of 2015, and then our test year was 2016 to race in 2017. So essentially the first car was designed in about 4 months. And of course the car that went to Monte Carlo was a big evolution of that, but done in essentially 1 year for everything.
Mad. Having been through that tricky 17, how did last year compare? Obviously the performance was much stronger, but it was still a difficult year for the team, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that's the comparison I wanted to make, is that season last year is the hardest one we've done since that 2017 one from my point of view, just because every other season after that we've always managed to pick up a bit of breathing room somewhere. Either championships had gone out of reach, which as soon as a championship is out of reach, it gives you the ability to think about the future more clearly. But all the time a championship's in reach, you can't stop going for it. And last year it was continuously in reach. Of course, there was some points where it looked almost impossible, but mathematically it was always possible. So to push for every event and then come out of every event knowing you have to push for the next one, it was just relentless preparation and relentless work. And some of that work went unrewarded, because if we look at the fight back that we did, it didn't go smoothly back to winning. It went kind of a bit up and down on the way. So to be motivated if you can see that you're coming back is much easier than to take another hit and then come back again. And that's what happened really to the whole team during last year, was having to withstand some really difficult events to keep fighting for that manufacturer title.
How much of that was down to the driver lineup and to the rotation and to, let's be frank, to Kalle taking a part season? Because there was, fundamentally from what we could see, there were no mechanical deficiencies with the car. Was it the driver lineup?
I think there was a lot of contributing factors. It's not fair to contribute it just to a driver lineup, because the driver lineup was the one that we agreed as a team we would go in with. So it would be very unfair to lay that down as a reason why we're not winning, because at the beginning of the season we made that plan as a team and we went out to deliver the best we can on that plan. And certainly, I think I've said it to you before, is that at the beginning of the season, the lineup was strong over the whole team. But in terms of putting together a whole season to win, particularly with the new point system, would be very challenging. So I think that was the contributing factor that came on top, is that we had a driver lineup which supported good, consistent results over the season, but where we were maybe lacking and where the point system demanded was spikes of very intense Sunday activity to gain points at a moment where you don't necessarily need to take risk, which is the key point of the season, which is that if you were behind in last season's point system, there was absolutely no reason not to go with a speed on Sunday that was essentially do or bust.
Yeah, Hyundai and Safari, or Hyundai blah blah blah.
But if you look at our strategy as a team over all the seasons, do or bust has not been there very often. We've always managed to control situations to the point where we're looking always to the next event, the next points, and trying to control it across all of our drivers. And so last season was very difficult on this topic.
Yeah, no, I can believe it. And you know, you're collectively, as obviously in World Rally Championship, you're such a driven team, and to actually lose a driver's title for the first time in a lot of years, that must have stung a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think I can talk for myself personally how I handled that, which is that once I came to the conclusion that this is going to be like it is, then I was able to put all of my energy into the manufacturer championship and work with all the drivers and the team members to say that we now need to show that we are collectively the best, which was incredibly important for me. And actually, it's one thing which we won't ever know, but I was a little bit concerned about what would happen if we didn't win that manufacturer championship, because I didn't, at least personally, I didn't ever accept that we weren't going to do that.
Yes.
Which was a kind of maybe a way of thinking that you kind of hide from the truth for as long as possible to protect yourself and your motivation. But I know it was not just me, but many members of the team were in the same position, which is that we could not comprehend that we weren't going to win that. And so had we not succeeded in that last power stage, I think the situation would have been quite difficult in the truck for sure. Yeah,
I mean, that's incredibly honest of you there, because it would be very difficult, wouldn't it? You're so accustomed to winning now. There's a real winning mentality here, and at some point it will end, of course it will. But you're right, because, you know, how do you look going into this year with not a championship behind you from last year?
Yeah, I think obviously the history is one part of it, and maintaining records. To be honest, I think you know more about the records than I do, because I don't tend to remember so well how many rallies was won or how many. This is more. Jari is the man for this.
He's the man.
He's the man for that. Where I see it important is that I know the amount of work that the team put in, and I don't like the word deserve. I think it's used quite wrongly in motorsport many times, that a team deserves or a driver deserves this or that. I don't think anyone really deserves anything. But where I would say last season was important is that I know how much work and how much effort was put in, and the way in which the Manufacturers' Championship specifically was calculated, I don't think was done as a side effect of the point system. The winning manufacturer should be the manufacturer, which means the whole team, including the OEM behind, has contributed through the road cars that they develop, through the motorsport activities, how it's used in the R&D. It's the best manufacturer. It's not the best collection of drivers. It's the best manufacturer. And I think we were fighting against a point system last year that didn't reward being a good team and being a good manufacturer. And so we had to win it despite that. And we showed that we could win it despite that. Yeah,
and I remember we talked a lot of the second half of last year as well, and you wanted to emphasise the kind of global picture here that, okay, it was a difficult year, but it was a great success commercially in terms of the Rally 2 car. That car came into the championship last year and won immediately, and you can take a great deal of satisfaction from that.
Yeah, I think I obviously there was this some comments from Colin about our season being a disaster and these kind of things, and I think I pointed out to him that maybe it wasn't a disaster.
Yes.
It's a disaster! It's a disaster! No, it's not a disaster. It's not a disaster.
Where I felt this was important is that obviously I know all of the people behind, and I know that they read the media and they listen to your podcasts and things like this. And quite often people come to me and they say,
why are we having a disaster?
Yeah, why are we having a disaster? for those people who have worked extremely hard to deliver a Rally 2 car out of this same operation, and a Rally 2 car which won the World Championship in WRC 2 at the same time as we were fighting to come back to win in the main championship. On the face of it, some of the results may not have been as good as we hoped, but in the big picture, certainly we were delivering what we'd set out to do, and I think that's the most important point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just moving on a little bit now, we touched on driver lineup, obviously. Kalle Rovanpera, what he did last season was very much on everybody's mind, and he is back this year. It's been a couple of quiet-ish rallies from him. Now, again, we've talked about this, and I questioned his motivation coming into this year. It's almost like the gap year, isn't it, between university? You know, do you go into university on the back of a gap year, fully motivated to learn again, get on with what you were doing? That was the question from me, and you always turned that round and said, actually, it's worked really well for him because he's gone, he's done what he wanted, he's relaxed, he's come back refreshed and recharged. And is that still your thought process? What are your thoughts on Kalle's Monty and Sweden?
I think in terms of the effort behind the preparation and the motivation to do well, they absolutely stand by everything I said before, that he's come back fighting. Yeah. The way to see that from our point of view is more in the testing and in the feedback that we get from him, and his willingness to try to find ways to improve the car and improve himself. That is on the level that it needs to be, and I think the start of the season has been very difficult for all the reasons we discussed before, technically with the car, and perhaps being out of the car last season for some of the events, and then having so many changes on top has made the start of the season more difficult for him. But I think we need to also consider that we've done a couple of events so far that aren't necessarily Kalle Rovanpera's main events, particularly Monte Carlo.
Yeah, Monte.
Sweden, I agree. He's had a good history of snow events, so he should be able to be there for sure. But with the change of tyre, definitely there's a different driving style that's needed with that particular tyre.
What is, this is one of the things that we've talked a lot about, a tyre and Kalle, and sorry to interrupt there, but I always saw Kalle as a driver that you get these drivers who understand the car, the problem, the issue, drive around it, and if you'd said to me one of the drivers will struggle with the tyre, I wouldn't necessarily have thought it was going to be Kalle. Fair point?
Fair point. It's very difficult to answer without going too technically into. We understand quite a lot about what this tyre needs, right? In terms of the car setup, and also in terms of the driver input, and there's a very fine balance. To put it into some sort of perspective, during the event we saw multiple drivers do very bad stages in all different cars, and then come back and say to the cameras, I just learnt something, and then do a much better stage, maybe not be at the top, but at least improve massively by understanding something. And this is a combination of the driving, but also the car setup and how everything works together. And during an event like this, where things are going in a difficult way, you have to make some decisions, which is like, do I continue to gather the points and come out of it in one piece, or do I continue to push to find different things? And this comes down to strategy. I think that in the start of the season, things have been for sure difficult for him, but he has some rallies coming where we know he can be strong. So I think Elfyn said it the best, which is that Kalle's not usually off the pace for very long.
No, absolutely, and you're quite right. If that strategy is exactly right in Monty and Sweden, because there is no point in pushing. It's just about taking what those events will give you, because when he the most important thing for Kalle is really the gravel tyre, isn't it? Is understanding that and getting to grips with that. If we were seeing, if round 2 had been Portugal or Sardinia or something, and he'd been struggling with the gravel tyre, that's maybe a cause for concern. But as we said before, it's a very specific event, isn't it? It's Sweden, so.
Well, I think the thing with Sweden is it looks so pretty and it looks so innocent on TV, but when you see the average speeds that they're doing in these stages, and the margin for error we saw with certain cars, it's a rally where you can push and you can push and you can push and everything seems to be nice, and then I think you don't even know what's happened and you're in a snowbank and you're stuck.
Yeah.
And you're there either all day or 5-10 minutes if you're lucky.
Yeah.
So it's very digital how this goes, is that it's a very nice feeling to push on these events. It's very traditional event in terms of the scenery we see and the bouncing off the snowbanks, and it's all very nice. But the moment you're stationary and you've got no points, the reality comes really fast.
Yeah.
So to avoid that situation is the number one priority, because to recover from a 0 score or a very low score is very difficult.
Yeah. Hankook, what are your thoughts? I mean, from what we've seen, the one thing that we were keen to avoid was punctures. Seem to have done that, and I'm sure you've done some gravel testing. What are your thoughts so far? 2
very strong events in terms of reliability from Hankook already. Monte Carlo, I think, was a really big success in that it's so difficult to cover all those conditions with tyres which are reliable, but also have a certain level of performance. In terms of tarmac, everything went really well, and I think the drivers were all happy with their ability to get the car and the tyre to a place that's acceptable for them. The snow tyre in Monte Carlo was a little bit more challenging. It is a difficult technically tyre to make, because it's a tyre that needs to survive driving on tarmac and then work on snow at some point later, or vice versa, which is a challenge to make that durable and performant at the same time. But certainly the starting point was good enough to make Monte Carlo the rally it needs to be, and I know they're working to do something for the future to improve that for the drivers. For Sweden, one tyre, a very different characteristic of tyre compared to what we had last year. Performance level down a little bit, but ultimately the main difference for the driver is more, I think, a feeling, because the tyre construction is so it is very strong, and on snow this takes some of the performance away, increases the stiffness, changes the car balance.
Takes some of the feeling away from the driver a little bit?
Yeah, I think obviously a soft tyre gives you more feedback, and some of the elements that the drivers are used to in terms of driving on snow were definitely missing or different, and this was a challenge for them. But ultimately, the tyre worked for everyone over the whole event. The number of I don't know what we call them now, they're not punctures anymore. Wheel damages or something.
Tyre issues or. So
these things didn't happen.
Not many P words.
Yeah, not many of those. Moving on to gravel though, we've done the testing. We're happy with the tyre in terms of the durability again, and similar situation, to be honest. The performance level, of course, is not quite where we were after years of development of the previous tyre, but that's normal. And
does it matter? Does it really matter if we're a couple of, or half a second a K down?
No, I think ultimately it doesn't matter, because the car and the package overall is fast enough that it's still, I mean, to the naked eye you don't see really any difference. From a spectator or TV perspective, everything is perfectly fine. I think the durability is very important, so that we don't have rallies decided by reliability issues. So that's really good. I think where the performance does matter, to the point that it's consistent between the conditions, so that it's safe enough, so that we have the right range of tyres.
Yes.
So obviously we have hard, soft options, and then crosses and front rears and all these different combinations, and to make sure that the performance difference between all of the available tyres gives you those options to make the car drivable, talking about gravel specifically, from a dry rally, that it's durable enough to make it to the end. But if that rally turns wet, the car is, let's say, safe to drive over those very wet conditions.
Because would it be fair to say with Pirelli there wasn't a vast difference between the two gravel compounds?
Yeah, it's fair to say that it was a tyre where you could use different compounds on the same car without too much effect, which we saw a lot. I think one of the most common tyre choices over the season is cross. If your tyres are very different in terms of their characteristic, a cross wouldn't be something so popular. So I think it's fair to say.
It is a big ask, isn't it, for Hankook, for any tyre manufacturer to go Monty, Sweden, Safari, new event in Canaries. What do you expect from them in Safari, and how difficult a challenge is Safari for the tyre?
Yeah, I think the overall challenge of the championship is massive because we have so many conditions. I think the other thing that is difficult to appreciate is the sheer supply quantity that's needed, because we're not just talking about these top drivers, we're talking about a tyre which is used from the first car to the 107th car starting, potentially. However many customers or teams want to join, they need to supply those tyres as well. If something needs to be changed, we're talking about changing a huge number of tyres. So the challenge for them is massive, and they've done a really good job so far to keep up not only with the conditions, the events, but also the demand from the championship in terms of quantity. Looking to Safari specifically, it's a strange one in terms of tyre, because in terms of durability, it's not actually the hardest for the tyre. Something like Sardinia or Portugal, Greece is much more difficult in terms of the tyre wear, for one, and tyre wear brings also extra jeopardy in terms of reliability of the tyre, because obviously the thinner a tyre becomes, the more likely it is to be damaged. So Safari, the ground is, as we've seen, very soft, which is actually quite nice for the tyre wear. Where it comes, the difficulty in terms of strength is individual hits, which can come where a rock is not where you expect or off the line. And so in Safari you need a tyre which is capable of providing grip on very soft sandy surfaces, which are not that difficult in terms of durability, but then when necessary, survive a rock hit, which can be very big. So it's a strange event in terms of tyre, to be honest. Yeah.
You've touched upon there the fact that it is a real challenge across this year, 14 rounds of the championship. We've got some new events coming in. We've got obviously Spain, Canaries, we've got Paraguay, we've got Saudi. How do you as a team prepare for those events? I mean, okay, Canaries probably more straightforward. It's in Europe. You can test on tarmac there, but the further away ones, Paraguay, Saudi, how do you prepare for those?
Yeah, I mean, the basic rule behind the preparation of new events is, first of all, is we try to work out what we've done before, which is similar or the same. So that's pretty much starting point we always do, which will involve some sort of reconnaissance, either by in person or by video. We'll gather as much information as we can about what's the characteristic of this new event, and then try to fit it into that's like another event. So for Paraguay, for example, we might say it's a lot like Chile, or it's a lot like another event we've done before. That gives you lots of starting points. It gives you where should we be testing if we're going to test for that event, because obviously we can't test outside of Europe, so we have to find something similar. It tells you what's the starting point for the setup. It tells us which tyre data we should be looking at. So you start to build up a kind of map based on all the experience over different years and different cars.
So where's like Saudi?
Good question. Well, of course, the sandy element, we can see some similarity to bits of Kenya in terms of driving on sand, but it's a good question that depending on the route that's picked, we've seen before with events that they can surprise you.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Jordan event that we did in the past was expected to be very soft initially and turned out to be quite the opposite and was almost like tarmac in places. So we need to see which roads will be selected and how they'll be prepared, and then understand if there's a lot of sand or duney areas. Certainly that will be something that will be outside of our data set that we need to understand.
Is it quite exciting to go there and need to be quite dynamic in terms of changing the car when you get there to see what you've got in front of you after the recce or whatever? Or are you typical engineer that you want to manage out that risk and you need to know everything before you arrive?
No, I think in the way we need to handle that, or the way I tend to handle that, is that in the World Rally Championship we have a really big range of events. Canaries is one where I know we have a very specific setup. We'll have a very specific preparation. We can control the event apart from the weather to a very high level. So it's as close to being in a race or a racetrack situation as you can be in rally. And so when it's like that, we aim to control all of those things in that way. So we know that the aero will be important. We know that the suspension setup will be very specific, and we can narrow all those things down and say all these tiny details will make a difference.
Yes.
But then when you go to somewhere like Safari, the number one priority is that the car is still working on Sunday.
Yeah.
And everything else is kind of a luxury. And so you have to go there with a different mindset, which is that service by service, the car will leave here with the maximum functionality and the maximum chance of coming back. Yeah. After that, you then look, how can we be a little bit faster here or a little bit faster there? Yeah. And of course, try to make the car as drivable as possible for all of the drivers. To put it into a kind of specific example, there's absolutely no point in trying to control the height of the front air dam like we would on tarmac in Kenya, because the chances are the air dam's not there anyway after 5Ks.
Yeah.
So it's a very different technical preparation, but behind it, I think the most important is the mindset, which is that it's very easy in rally to say that details don't matter. But actually details matter on a varying degree depending where you are and what you're doing. Yeah,
no, absolutely. You've touched a little bit already on this new car, the 2025 car, with obviously no hybrid, smaller restrictor, other changes to it. How, from an operational perspective, yes, we're only 2 rounds in, but taking out the hybrid, we had some issues with hybrid and the system not functioning perhaps as it should do. Is this a more straightforward car to run?
Yeah, I mean, the big answer is yes, it's more straightforward. The thing that's maybe somewhat disappointing from a team and a technical perspective is that we really did get on top of it.
Yes.
And we worked really hard to be on top of it.
Yeah.
It was a difficult system to manage. There were some nuances to making it work correctly. And we learned a lot about that, despite not having a huge amount of information about it because it was a control system. But we learned a lot about how to look after it, how to manage it, and how to get the maximum performance out of it.
And you made those gains in the first 3 years, and you really potentially you should have reaped the reward of that investment in time and everything over these next 2 years.
Yeah, I think the thing that's positive about it is that I think we reaped everything that was nearly possible. I think it went out at a time where the playing field was leveled or leveling.
Yeah.
So I think we did get our return on the investment of the time and the effort we put into making that work. Of course, there's always an element of disappointment when you do a chunk of work and then you have to put it to one side and you're not using it anymore. But in the big picture, in terms of the participation of the events, number of drivers, number of teams, I think there wasn't really any choice. And so we are where we are with it. And overall, it is more simple. Just in terms of course, we had certain additional safety criteria we had to manage in terms of personnel, in terms of transportation, logistics. So it's more straightforward. And to be honest, from a personal point of view, and with the engineers, there was always a routine in the morning and before every stage that you need to make sure that your hybrid system is alive and working and able to deliver torque for the next stage. And this was something that we were working on during the day in the event almost continuously. And it's almost something that, you know, when the car was leaving service in the morning, you had to engage the high voltage before the car would leave, to leave in EV mode. And to make that happen wasn't always straightforward. But to a rally driver, rightly so, they come to the car, they turn it on and they leave. But we were never really quite at that point. And so the stress of the car leaving service in the morning was quite intense. And nowadays they do just rock up with 10 seconds to go, turn it on and leave. So that's
pour
much
some
more
fuel in it and away we go.
Much more straightforward.
We have seen in Sweden, competition has perhaps stepped up with Hyundai's made changes to the car. From what you saw of that car, we've talked a lot about as a championship about what's coming with that new i20. What do you think? Was there anything on that car that you thought, oh, yeah, that's good, that's clever, that's going to give us some competition this year?
I think it's difficult to say with essentially one event with the upgraded car in Sweden. The upgrades they made were quite significant, and it obviously took a lot of time and effort to do. I think the technical regulations changing at the same time and the tyre changing at the same time adds complication to that. So I would say that we've seen that the i20 is getting faster and faster every season, which led ultimately to last season's battle, how it came down. Of course, we talked about some of the more political reasons, point systems, driver contributions, but there's no getting away from the fact that the competition technically against the other cars was much stronger last year than it was the year before. And I think with the upgrades that they've done, there's no reason why that shouldn't go again. And what we see last season and the beginning of this season is that essentially what we have is that sometimes a Toyota is faster and sometimes a Hyundai is faster. It really depends on the stage, on the conditions, and it's sector by sector. It's not rally by rally or whatever. So it's very, very close, and hopefully the upgrades don't make it too much quicker.
Is there much more to come from your car this year and to the rest of this homologation cycle?
In terms of our Joker usage, we've been a little bit ahead of Hyundai, I think it's fair to say. So some of those bigger upgrades which they've done now, we did already around a year ago, changing the full suspension system on the car to something which was more suitable to after learning for a couple of years. I think that's the same situation as what Hyundai's been in now, is that when you develop a car from the beginning, there's a lot of aspects, and you realise after even maybe a few events or at least a season that maybe some of your choices weren't the best ones. Then you can put those into a Joker package to go forwards. We've done that and used up the majority of those big Joker packages. We have a few options left which we're working on, and we will with the new rules which actually came about, which is that you can spread those Jokers over 2 years, if you remember. So we haven't fully decided yet whether to come with something mid-season this year or wait and put it all together as one for next season. So we're working on options.
I guess, that does depend as well, doesn't it, how the Hyundai unfolds. If it is radically a step up, then perhaps you need to bring those changes quicker, and you just got to wait and see, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason of waiting is that the ballpark has changed since last season. So at the end of last year, credit to our team, we changed our development program as soon as the FIA regulations were announced.
Yeah.
We took, I would say, a small gamble because the FIA rules on the new technical regulations being written in print, signed off by all the parties in the FIA, wasn't done until the end of the year essentially. But the rumours were there, and the discussions were there that things were going to change quite significantly. So we changed or added some things to our development program, and then came to the conclusion that these changes were inevitable. And we pushed forward on some items for the engine and for the transmission, which had the rules, had suddenly at the end of the year they said, actually no, hybrid staying and we keep the same engine.
Yeah.
Would have put us in a slightly tricky position for sure. But I think the chances of that were really small. So we pushed our designers, engineers and our supply chain really hard and came up with an engine and a transmission which is specific to these regulations, and I think that's also something that has put us a little bit ahead in the beginning of this year.
Moving forward, 2027 is coming. You're a man who likes to be ahead, as we've just discovered. What can you share on your 2027 car? Have you started? I'm sure you probably wake up in the morning thinking about the 27 car.
No, I think in the big picture, it's something that we manage in a very specific way here in the team, is to work on the future at the same time as working on the current. And it's always a balance. Rally teams are not the same size as some other motorsports in terms of the total capacity of the team. So we operate a lot of cars. So there's a lot of work to do just to be there.
Yeah.
So everything that's on top of that development and future planning has to come from somewhere. So there's always a balance about how to push the car you have today for the rally that you have next week against the car that you'll have in 1 or 2 years' time.
Yeah.
And how to put the right amount of resource and effort behind it. At the end of the day, if we do an interview like this and you say, why didn't you win such and such event, and I say it's because we're developing the next car, it's not really a good reason.
Yeah.
And the same vice versa, which is that if the next car is not very good and we say it's because we were concentrating on Monte Carlo 2025, it's equally just sounds like excuses. So to balance this ultimately is really difficult because people have expectations of next week, but also people have expectations of the future. That's where we're at with 27 at the moment, which is trying to get that balance right, because at the end of last year, for sure, we were pushing really hard on securing that manufacturer title.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that securing those kind of titles, it builds for the future anyway, because what you put into that, you get back in terms of motivation of your whole team, in terms of status of the team. It's a really complicated matrix of how to get the best out of everybody in the whole operation. And for 27, we are, of course, working with the FIA to finalise the regulations and working on our concept car.
Definitively, have you started work on a 27 car? And actually, what does, yes, we've started work on the 27 car mean? Because having meetings about, philosophically, this is what we'd like to do. That's technically the start of the job, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk goes on about teams having dialogue with the FIA and forming the regulations, but it's maybe difficult when you're outside of that process to know what that really means. So to give a small insight into that is that when the FIA starts to put together certain regulations, it's very difficult to say yes or no that we think that's a good idea or not without at least thinking about and drawing something. You have to have a look using the modern 3D design tools, put together concepts using parts that you have from other cars, sort of putting a picture together about what the FIA is proposing, what it might look like, and then using that data to feed back to the FIA and say, no, that needs to be a bigger diameter, or no, we need more freedom here or there to make this work. So that's how the dialogue looks. And as you know, that dialogue's been going on for several months already, last year and the beginning of this year. So during that process, we have been putting together all of that data into a kind of mechanical concept. Externally, we don't know exactly what the aero and the bodywork regulations will be. That's one of the biggest question marks now. But mechanically, for sure, we have been looking, what does the FIA's concept look like?
Because externally it can be anything, can't it? It can be an SUV, it can be a saloon car, or whatever you want.
Yeah, basically that's what we know at the moment, is that it's going to something that is called prototype. The closest to what we can expect is more like what you might see in a Dakar type event, where you can come with a car which looks like a specific model, as Toyota does with its Hilux. Or on the other hand, you can come with a car which is a specific sand buggy looking, which another manufacturer might do. And these cars have a regulation that allows them to compete together. So this is the concept behind. Into the detail and into the millimeters, what you can put where and what shape it has to be, we're still working with the FIA. But
is it frustrating for you as an engineer, as a technical director? You want the clean sheet of paper, the bottomless budget, to just do exactly whatever you want. Yet it's very restrictive, these regulations. We know cost cap of €345,000. Is it the same challenge for you as an engineer?
Yeah, I think it certainly, my opinion on this has evolved over the years. I think if you'd asked me that question a few years ago, I would have given a different answer, probably more towards, as engineers, we want as open regulations as possible to design the ultimate rally car machine, whatever you want to call it. As we've learnt more about the championship, as we've learnt more about what the future might look like in terms of technology, it becomes more apparent that the sport and the participation is as important or more important than the technology behind. So the regulation has to satisfy obviously a technical element, because you have to deliver a car that's capable of driving in the World Rally Championship, which has to be a certain level of car already, because as you know, not all rally cars would go to Kenya and survive, so we have to be on a certain level, and that will be achieved, I have no doubt about that. But on the other hand, we need to be really efficient with the costs so that the participation level can improve, and the number of drivers who have access to capable top-level machinery increases. And if we continue with let's say, money and technology no object form of regulations, then we aren't going to go that direction.
Yeah. Obviously, Tom, you've been around the sport since 2005. You've seen various incarnations of cars. Which were your favourite cars to work on? Was it the 2-litre cars back in the early noughties, or tell us which have been the standouts for you?
Yeah, I think every generation holds a little bit of a different feeling and a different reason for my feeling behind them. When I first started in rally, it was the 2-litre generation, and I would say the thing behind those, which really still I can imagine today, is that the first time I went in one with the 2-litre turbocharged engine, the torque and the acceleration was like something unbelievable to someone just came out of university, got given a laptop and said, you're an engineer now. And then to go into a car with nearly 1,000 Newton meters of torque, be driven by one of the best drivers in the world in a machine that capable, that's still probably the biggest memory of my World Rally career, is just the realization that like this is serious business. Later on, with the introduction of the 1.6 litre global race engine, which is actually the basis of the engine we still use today in terms of regulation, obviously a modification of, but that era was almost a bit like what we're talking about for 2027 in many ways, which is there was an element of simplicity back, no center differential, what should be a more cost-effective engine, which it was at that time, but actually the regulations got a little bit out of hand over the last years. In terms of 2027, the 2011, I think it was, era of these first 1.6 litre simple transmission cars is quite close to what is the expectation of performance level of the future. So that was definitely a really interesting period in that I think it achieved then what we're expecting of 27, which is the competitiveness across different teams and different drivers somewhat equalised. And it was possible to come to the World Rally Championship, as we saw, with lots of different customer teams involved, and some big entries in the rallies. So that's definitely an interesting period. The 2017 generation of car was, from an engineering perspective, something quite incredible and interesting. Of course, the engine performance was really up there at nearly 400 horsepower from a 1.6 litre turbo engine with centre differential allowed, and the biggest point for that season, of course, was the change in aero regulations, which were, I mean, in 2017, almost completely unlimited in terms of devices. Of course, the geometry was somewhat limited, but that 5-year period with those cars, and probably the way that they were developed over that 5 years to the point of 2021, they was not only so fast in terms of stage time and performance in that year, but also something that you don't see very often is almost every driver from every team loving their car.
Yes.
Which, for an engineering point of view, and even a big picture of the championship point of view, is something really nice to see, because drivers complaining at the end of stages about this or that or the other. I mean, it somehow can be interesting in an antagonistic type of way, but to really see and hear drivers really passionate about driving those cars because of the performance behind them, but also the handling, and that they can make the car do exactly what they want, I think is something that was really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You talked about there your sort of progression from university into the World Rally Championship, into M Sport. Was it always going to be rallying for you? Have you always been a big fan? Are you a historian? Was it always this sport that you were destined for?
It started from Wales Rally GB. So where I grew up was not far from Cheltenham Racecourse, and my family had no connection or interest in motorsport, but some friends were interested, and I went along with them to see a stage somewhere in Wales.
Right.
I don't remember exactly which one now, but
Yaris will probably tell you.
Yeah, he'll know where I was. I remember on the way back, it was the evening that the Cheltenham Super Special at the racecourse was going to be on, and it just so happened that I think the M50 motorway was travelling back towards where we lived, and there was the World Rally cars on the motorway driving with the drivers with the head cans, and we were driving past, and I remember looking and thinking, like, that's a little bit something.
Yes.
And I think it's from that moment that I remember thinking, this is something that I'd like to get to know more about. And it kind of developed through going to do engineering in university, putting together a 205 GTI challenge car, doing events for a couple of years with my dad doing spanner works, and the co-driver's dad doing spanner works, and rebuilding the car until 3 o'clock in the morning, only to find it still doesn't work. This kind of thing, and then the realization. Actually, it was Elfyn Evans that made me realise that I wasn't a rally driver. In Sweetlam, there was a test day for the 205 Rally Championship, and I was there with my car, and Gwyndaf was offering like tuition sort of thing going on, and he was going out with all the different drivers from the championship and discussing how to do better and so on. And he drove my car with me co-driving on the test stage, and there was one particular downhill through a gate and then a junction before a small stream. With the road car gearbox, if you put fifth gear, it was a Group N car, so when you put fifth gear, you knew you were going fast.
Yeah.
And I always used to like put fifth and think, oh, this is a bit much now. Yeah. And so on this particular stage, I think I was braking from fourth, and the place where I was braking from fourth, Gwyndaf put fifth, and I thought, at university on Monday, I'm going to concentrate a little bit harder. So I don't know if my mum paid Gwyndaf to do that or what, but certainly it focused the mind more on a more traditional employment future.
Yeah, it's amazing though, isn't it, how it's come full circle? That you can probably sit, and Gwyndaf probably remembers that moment.
But actually, he didn't.
Oh, didn't he?
I think he remembered being at the day, but of course, the thing with rally drivers is this is all normal to them, and when we as mere mortals go in the car with them and realise that they're doing something which is, no matter how good amateur you might be, to go with with these top guys is something totally different world.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely. There was, of course, a brief interlude in the World Rally Championship career of Tom Fowler, where you departed M Sport and remained in the Northwest, but went to Sellafield.
Yes.
To the nuclear industry. Tell us a little bit of the thinking. Why did you go there, and did you learn anything to come from the nuclear industry to Toyota? What was all that about?
Yeah, I think during the time I worked with the Ford World Rally team, most of the time I was the engineer for Mikko Hovnen as the biggest period of time. Yeah. And we spent many years battling, as it turned out, for second place in the World Rally Championship. One season by only 1 point, which in many ways was quite similar to the situation that we had last year in Toyota. When I was working there, really it was not as a job per se, but really as being part of a sports team and battling to win with these drivers, and that continued, of course, with some other drivers after Mikko left to go, including Thierry for a few rallies at one point. But as you know, things sort of made a small turn in the history of M Sport around similar time, and from a personal perspective, I really do see my involvement in this sport as being a member of a sports team and contributing towards that. Yeah. And so I found it very difficult to operate, to say I couldn't find a place where I could step back and say this is only a job.
Yes. Yeah.
So that led to essentially going to find something that was only a job and seeing, can I put my mind to something else outside of that and approach life in a different way. Yeah.
Did you wear a white coat at Sellafield? Was it? It was more blue, I think. Was it?
But certainly the experience was very interesting. I got to be involved in and see some things that you would never be able to see if you didn't take that possible career choice. Yeah. Of course, a lot of those things are not in the public domain, but I think the main thing that I understood was working for such a huge company. So I went from working for a very, basically in global terms, a very small company to something with thousands of people, with thousands of viewpoints, some of which right, some of which wrong, but also understanding that there's a whole corporate world out there where budgets have to balance, things are done for financial reasons which you may not agree with technically, which in motorsport is much balanced in a different way. Yeah. And how to work with with different kinds of technicians and mechanics, for example. I mean, for example, the mechanics we have in a rally team are unbelievable. You know, when a car comes to a service of 10 minutes in the morning, and you asking them to change a turbocharger of a car in 10 minutes, which if you wanted to change your road car turbocharger, you'd have to leave it with the dealership probably for a week.
Yes.
These guys are doing incredible work almost without question, and they're trying to find a way. You know, if you say you can't change the turbocharger in 10 minutes, we're not going to do it, they'll say we'll find a way to do it. The motivation behind those people is something that you don't need to even question. But then in other walks of life, where there's the motivating factors are different, you need to find a way to get a team of mechanics or technicians to do things for you as an engineer, not because you want to win the World Rally Championship, but because it's the best thing to do for another reason. Yeah. And so to work with different kind of people and different kind of motivations, and to understand different people's perspective, certainly was an interesting time. Even it led to, of course, being able to be involved in this project, which was the most important.
Yeah. So can we take from that then that you couldn't deal with life, that you were just going to work 9 to 5? You needed still that sporting challenge, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, what I found is that when there's those limiting factors, my motivation was just going down and down. Yeah. And so to be a very motivated person inside of a place that doesn't necessarily demand huge motivation is quite difficult. Yeah. It's not from a negative point, it's just how normal industry works, which is that things have a time frame, and it's not one that you're used to from motorsport. And so when you say we want to get this done now, everyone says why, and then you're like, oh yeah, good point, why? So, whereas in motorsport, there's always someone coming. In many ways, how it works here is that many people are coming to me and saying, let's get this done, and then we have to find a way. And so it's really that group atmosphere and that team that you have to find a solution.
How did that move back from Sellafield back to the World Rally Championship? How did that happen?
So it was a bit cryptic in the start. So as you know, when I was working with Mikko Hirvonen, his co-driver was Jarmo, who also works here today. So he called me 2015 summertime roughly, asking about what I'm up to and what I'm doing, but didn't really say anything about anything. Right. Just like strange call, like what are you doing? Are you happy? Which you know. Which
the response was.
Which, if you know, like Mikko and Jarmo, a random call to ask about your welfare is not normal.
Quite odd.
Yeah. So I mean that went on to some conversations also with Mikko as well, and it culminated in coming to see them here in Jyväskylä, and then getting more details on arrival that there was a potential for a project coming up in the future, and would I be interested? At the time I said, I'll go back to England and I'll think about it. I think I spoke to my dad about it, and he basically said that if you don't give it a go, you'll always be wondering what might have happened. And what you're doing at the moment, you can do anytime.
Yes.
So I think that was probably what I was already thinking in my mind already, but just needed to hear it. And so I agreed. The rest was, let's say, a bit, as we discussed earlier, the beginnings of the project are just classified as complicated. And after 1 year of battling, of course, it all started from Monte Carlo and almost 10 years in the history.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And recently 5 championships in 7 years. It's incredible success for you. Where does it end? Will you always be a rallyman, or Toyota has a great presence in endurance racing, of course, and moving towards Formula One, just to the periphery of it. Is there ambition from within Tom Fowler to go and rule the world of Formula One?
No, I think one of the most important things for me outside of the technical aspect is what we have here in the team in Toyota, and what we created together is is incredibly important to me personally, not only from the team perspective, but also, of course, we are a company here in Finland, which takes some running together with a really good team of people. My motivation at the moment is to continue to develop the company here, that we always have the opportunity to be a team and represent ourselves in whatever motorsport our manufacturer in Toyota wishes us to do. Of course, that's the most important point, is that we're representing Toyota and bringing to them what they wish from us. And that's aside from the technical point of view, that's my biggest motivation at the moment. And to answer the question on technically other types of events, the thing about rally is that the way that the knowledge that you gain from it is very specific, and there isn't so many people in the world who know the world of rally into the detail or have the experience over the many years, and it's the same in other formula. So to start from, let's say, junior again is quite difficult. So I think the most important thing for me at the moment, both technically and business point of view, is to continue to grow on what we have so far.
So now we're going to drill down a little bit, learn a bit more about Tom Fowler. Who's your hero?
Oh. That's on the spot. I've thought about this before, and I'm not sure I don't really like the hero situation. Sorry about maybe it's not the answer you wanted, but
exactly. But there's no engineer. I mean, there's Jean-Claude Vauquard, probably a generation before you, or those incredible Adrian Newey. These incredible people who've achieved massive kind of steps in motorsport. There's none of those that you look at and think, or maybe drivers. No, we don't do heroes.
No, not really do.
Who's the fastest driver you've ever worked with?
Oh, can you do that? The fastest?
It was Gwindaf, wasn't it, in that Peugeot?
It was Gwindaf in the Peugeot. No, I think it depends a lot on the condition situation, but I think some of the most impressive speed that I've seen is Kalle Rovanpera in bad weather conditions. And some of the events he did when it was raining or very muddy, and when he, you take someone and they beat another world champion by a minute. That's something.
You don't forget those moments, do you?
And so it's not one driver, but also the same situation occurs with someone like Seb Ogier on, I think on tarmac. To make gains on tarmac is very difficult, and to see him put a few seconds into another world champion is, again, quite incredible.
Best day of your career?
I think it was actually the power stage in Japan. There's been some really good days, but that one, because in the lead up to that, it was actually very interesting because we did absolutely everything you could possibly do to make that car fast. I mean, like Takamoto had no spare wheel. There were some other things we did which meant that the car was not going to last very long. Technically, we removed some things, we changed some settings, which meant that it was going to be as fast as it could be for that day, but after that day, it wasn't going to be driving much further. And to have that almost like liberating feeling that today you do everything. If it breaks down, it breaks down, but you have to win.
It's very pure, isn't it?
And then to actually to come in car by car and bosh, we've done it was pretty special.
Is that turning the engine up? Can you tell us a little bit more about what you could actually do to improve that performance?
I can give you some examples which are quite easy ones, but I mean, the engine was turned up. I mean, we talk about knock and knock limit, so the engine was knocking quite a lot. So, I mean, we could tell that a lot of the things we did were uncomfortable because the person who was in charge of each of those things we didn't want to do it initially until we got everyone on board. But the engine was absolutely maximum on the limit. In terms of the hybrid system, there's some margins that we had towards limits which are allowed in terms of energy, which we basically took it to the last decimal. There was the car weight was absolutely, minimum.
Yeah.
Including no spare wheel for Taka. So, and there's a few other things as well that we wouldn't like to mention, which are completely legal, of course,
yes.
but just
trade secrets.
Trade secrets, that's the one. But it was a really big collaboration of departments to say, look, because the thing is, we're very reliability orientated, so we have these limits, and we say to go beyond that would be stupid.
Yeah.
But on that day we were stupid.
Yeah. But as well, it was just the emotion, wasn't it? Because it was so this way. You just had no idea, and it literally came down to the final meters of the whole year.
Yeah.
It was almost a disaster.
It was almost a disaster. But I think the other moment about was also Taka's performance in the power stage, which actually, because Taka was on a tight leash for that event. Haruna-san and Akio was there, and they were, of course, fully on board with keeping Taka on the leash.
Yeah.
But then when it came to the power stage, that's where his freedom was given from the very, very top.
Yeah.
And
wow,
that's a situation which is, it's not easy to handle. It's not like be fast and you just automatically fast.
Yeah.
You have to do that. You have to change from being told reliability is number one, get to the finish. You have to bring the points home for the team. Yeah. And then to say, okay, now you change everything you've been doing, and on this last few kilometers, you give everything.
Yeah.
In a car which is set up bonkers.
Yes.
And so
and he was very, very conflicted, wasn't he, Taka? That was, we all love Taka. He's an incredible guy, but I've never seen him quite so emotional on that event. There was a lot going on for him, and that all feeds into that moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course, there was a lot of pressure on him, particularly because of what's happened in previous events. I mean, one thing that for sure he takes away from that is a really big learning opportunity about not only about himself but also what others expect of him. Yeah. Which, when you're alone in the cockpit pushing 100%, to be able to consider how your actions affect the whole rest of the team, the whole rest of all the people behind you, it's very easy to be misled at that point. Yeah. But I think he realised how big the picture is. I think we saw that in Sweden, that he was able to control himself every single stage. Yeah,
but just take us back to that moment in Japan where the car crossed the line and you'd done it. I mean, we've been through the numbers of your championships, they've got progressively more comfortable, and then to be so close, to have so much on the line and to do it, that split second when you'd done it, what was that like?
It was a little bit, there was kind of some strange emotional situation inside, because one thing is it's really difficult to know have you done it or not. Because the point system wasn't straightforward, right? So having like multiple connotations already loaded in Excels and things. Yeah. And then I think the nuance of the moment was that I think many people didn't realise is that even after the very strong performances in the power stage, Elfyn still had to cross the line to make that happen. Yeah. So the point at which you release the emotions and say, now it's done, I mean, I think for some people that was before Elfyn finished. I think that even on the TV, the sort of celebrations had started.
Like, hang on a sec.
But for me, and obviously the team around, we knew that Elfyn had to get to the finish. And on the stage, there was a sequence of corners which was about 900 meters from the finish, and then the last 900 meters was relatively straightforward, almost straight. Yeah. And I wasn't watching the television because it was too much. Really? So I was watching the tracking screen, and I knew that if Elfyn got the car past that last corner before this last 900 meters, that it was going to be okay. And when he got to that corner, like the things started coming, but still there was 900 meters to go. And then the thing that's always strange is, the TV has a delay. Yes. So when you see the power stage, for example, on TV, and you see the team who wins doing the shouting, the shouting moment is quite difficult to analyse, because is it when the car finishes in GPS coordinates? Yes. Or is it when the TV shows it's finished? Yeah. So that's why it always looks a bit strange, like someone goes, "Way!" and then someone else, "Whoa!" Yeah. And Yeah, so it's always complicated to know when the emotion's gonna come. But yeah, when Elfyn crossed the line in GPS, it was okay, and then on TV it was perfect.
Yeah, that was the best day. What was the worst day of your career?
Or the worst day was, you'll have to tell me the year because I'm rubbish with those, but the situation we had in Sardinia where Oit had the steering problem.
Oh, 19. Was that the championship year or the year before?
I think it was
18 or 19?
Yeah.
19. Yeah.
Of course, we to have such a technical issue in such a public way at the end of the power stage, and to have to watch the car driving with like no steering coming through and losing all that points. Akio was there. You know, it was it was a very difficult moment to accept and to see. Obviously, Oit coming back to the service, not best pleased, I think would be a way to put it. But I think it's probably the worst day to go through in terms of those kind of things. But actually, in terms of learning, you learn a lot on those days.
Yeah.
So you understand the responsibility you have behind the decision making. It's very easy to make a decision about how to go about fixing a problem or how to go about servicing a car and believing it's going to be okay. But what you realise is that if you just believe it's going to be okay, probably it's not going to be okay.
Yeah.
You have to make really sure.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I think this day showed us as a team that we have to make really sure.
Yeah.
And I believe it was a turning point actually in terms of our reliability, is that we fixed that problem going forwards and learned that if something can go wrong, it will.
Yeah, no, that's true. Superstitions? Do you have any?
No, normally no, but actually I did have a strange one before Japan last year, which is that my trainers were in really bad condition at the end of the season, but I've been using them for all the rallies.
Yeah.
And, you know, with one rally to go, we had turned the tables.
Yeah.
And
do you change the sneakers?
And I bought new trainers for Rally Japan because the old ones, I mean, they weren't smelling great, was one topic. But, you know very well a pair of shoes over one rally championship season doesn't go so well.
No.
I nearly changed the trainers, but then I thought it's not a good idea.
No.
And I didn't do it. So maybe that was the reason why we were.
Are these the new ones?
These are the new ones.
These are, wow. So these are definitely not going to be changed, are they? After the start you've had so far. Best thing about living in Finland?
Very quiet. The space and the countryside that you have to enjoy. No traffic jams. It's a very calm lifestyle.
Worst thing about not living in Britain?
Worst thing about Indian takeaways.
Really? You missed those?
Yeah.
No, we do those very well. Who's the coolest person in this team?
The coolest?
Yep.
I think it's Kalle Rovanpera.
I was going to say it's got to be Kalle Rovanpera, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he is. And on that subject, do you own any Kalle Rovanpera merch?
I don't.
Would he not give you a discount, or it's just not you?
He did give me a hat before, which I asked him for.
Yeah.
But it was for somebody else.
I see. Who's the first to buy the beer when you've won?
Actually, the engineering manager, Kevin Stroop, is pretty quick to the bar when things go well.
He's a thirsty guy, Kev, as well, isn't he, a little bit?
I don't know, but he's definitely happy to celebrate and has the correct length arms.
Yes, good answer. If Tom Fowler wasn't technical director at Toyota Gazoo Racing, what would you be doing right now?
My ideal other job would be to be an actual athlete, sports person in some other sport.
Right.
Like I really like that. The one thing I'm quite jealous of is like team sports, like football or rugby or ice hockey or something, where you have this kind of camaraderie between a group of people to go and win and like, get it done.
Yeah.
So I think it would have to be something like that.
Yeah. Are you a football fan?
No.
Are you a hockey fan?
Yes.
Out here? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
who's
one of the
your-
other good things about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's your local team?
Uvascular Yip.
Yip. The Yip. Yes. Moving on. Last couple of questions now. How confident were you, going back to 2010, when we were standing brushing our teeth in that car park in Romania on the way home from Turkey? How confident were you that we were going to find our way home on that bus?
Actually, I quite enjoyed this.
Oh
Yeah, there was a few good things about this trip.
Was there?
Yeah, there was. It's the only time that I've had an emergency runaway bag packed,
Right.
which not often necessary.
No, it's not. We'll go into what was in the bag in a second.
But yeah, I mean, it's not every day you get to drive through Bosnia in a bus.
Yeah. It was a journey, wasn't it? Quite literally.
Yeah.
It was, I think, 3 or 4 nights on the bus, and yeah, we were definitely on the right bus.
I think the other thing that was interesting about it was a kind of social experiment point of view.
Yes.
Is that there was some people in my team at that time who I believed to be extremely mentally strong, and quite often, the ones that are pushing that we have to be like this and we have to do like that.
Yeah.
And they were broken quite quickly.
Yeah.
And some of the ones that you thought maybe were weaker were rising to the top. So
I've got to say, there was John Millington, obviously the M Sport coordinator, and then there was Tim and Tom. There was you and Tim Jackson, and as soon as I saw you guys had got the map in your hands, complete confidence. I didn't have a huge amount of faith in our Turkish bus driver who'd written Calais, not Calais, but Calais, the place in France, on the side of a box of tissues. That was slightly disconcerting as we left the car park in Istanbul.
Well, I guess the disconcerting thing about the map was that it was an A3 map which had the whole of Europe on it.
Yeah.
So
and we were starting our journey in Asia, weren't
it was
we?
missing a little bit of detail.
Yeah, it was. Final question, who's going to win this year's Drivers' Championship?
Whew. I think that's really impossible to say, actually, because it's so. Of course, the point system right now, the points, how it's calculated right now. There's one driver who is clearly ahead in Elfyn, but then if you look behind that, you'll know the numbers much better than me. But basically, there's a load of drivers who all start with early 3s and late 2s.
Yeah.
4 or 5 of them, which are basically all clumped together.
Yeah.
And any one of those can easily make the leap across to Elfyn, which I think he's told you he's well aware of.
Yeah.
If you want one, I'll say Elfyn, but I think the others are pushing really hard to catch him.
No, that's good. As it says on your jumper, you are the boss. You're the man who knows. Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for the time.
You're welcome.
Great start to the year, and all the best for Safari.
Thank you.